Okay, so I want to take a few minutes here just to briefly describe a little bit of airbrush terminology, just for those that maybe are new to it or thinking about it. Okay, so I'm not going to get into all the, what is better and all that highbrow hoopla or whatever you want to call it. I was caught up in it too long ago until I wised up. And when you have several airbrushes plugged in all day long, for years and years and years and years, and you're just grabbing them because you have a terminal, right, with 5 actually or something, and you're in a studio and you're painting and building and making models, whatever, you just use what works. That's the way it is, right? You don't care about the name that's on it. I know why people do, like if somebody, because the hobby's diversified and super wide and deep. You know, you get guys at aircraft with this swirly, camouflage. Okay, fine, I get that, right? But I don't pay more than a couple $100 for an airbrush, never have. Like this is a siphon feed, okay? It's an old Vega 2000 that I still use and I just love it. It never fails. I do all my general kind of work with it and I can cut a small line with it. And the one thing I like about it is I don't have to worry about how tight I push needles in, or even if I'm robust when I pull the needle like this, for example, because nothing really goes wrong with it. Like it doesn't, like look at the needle. It's this fat, looks like a leather punch or something, right? And I can cut a really small line, but that's partly due to the compressor that I talked about. If you got good PSI with a tank reservoir behind it, you can transform a cheap airbrush with a good compressor, not the other way around. You can have a really nice airbrush, and if you don't have air, like consistent air, well, the airbrush is not going to perform up to the specifications that it should, right? So that, I like to use this, and it has a cup on the bottom, so it might be a problem when I get in tight like this, but not really. And when I use it on social media, it doesn't block the view like this one does. Okay, so this has a sister airbrush, or a few siblings, I guess. One was the Omni 5000, which was had a cup on the top like this, what I loved, but I used it really hard for 25 years, and I finally just wore it out. Wore the valve out, wore the tip out, and it's cost prohibitive for me to buy a insert like an orifice. I just threw it to the side in my graveyard of airbrushes and dug this out. This was my backup, and I really love this airbrush. Anyway, this one I bought, and I'm getting used to it, and I actually quite like it, and I'll tell you why. So this is a Pache Talon, made in USA. Look, it's like an old Pontiac or something, you know what I mean? It's not and I'm not going to say those names of those other really nice airbrushes, okay? That's not what this is about. Hashtag no sponsor Talon either, but I started with Pache with a single action, which I no longer use. A single action is where you don't have this ability to pull the needle back like that. See how this here? Let's see, can we take that off? Yeah, let's just spin that off. So a dual action, so a dual and a single action are the same when it just comes to going like this, right? And then you adjust with the single action, you loosen this up, and you pull the needle out back 1 millimeter, and then you tighten it, and then that's the pattern that you'll always get. But you won't be able to do this. That's not tight now, so the needle won't move. But now it will. So the dual action allows you not only to adjust like that and have air, but to pull it back, which I like because you can flush it out. You can stomp on it, flush out any particles or splatter, and you're good to go. And you can control the amount of air. Well, not really air. You don't really control the air because it's always whatever controlled on your compressor. So when you push this down, like you can't vary this and go halfway or whatever. It doesn't, I mean, some will, but these are just pretty much air on, air off, air on, air off. And then once you're bottomed out like that and you're on, you just think that back a bit, and that's when your paint and atomization process begins and starts to come out the orifice, which is relative, the line is relative to the tip technology. That's when it starts to make a difference. But if you're just doing scenery and blowing cars off and like the style in which I paint, this is all I need. Now I do like this siphon feed dual action. as opposed to this, or sorry, this gravity feed as opposed to the siphon feed dual action, which is the same, right? See, pulls it back. Wide open spray pattern, very narrow, and you learn to control it. Muscle memory, it's just like anything. It's like flying a radio-controlled airplane. Eventually you crash 5 times, and then you figure out what left and right is coming and going, etc. And then muscle memory takes over, and before you know it, you're flying helicopters. But anyway, with airbrushes, it's very similar, right? Like you get muscle memory, and you don't even think about it. You're just looking at the model, you know your color, and you're varying, you know, your application, thinking it in your mind. I like this type of siphon feed because it has a big cup. Some are fixed, like molded on, some unscrew. So with different sizes, right? So I have airbrushes, other ones I don't want to talk about right now, but you can change the cups and stuff, but I don't use those. So this I like for scenery because I can fill it with paint and pretty much lay it down, and you'll get a little bit that'll come out this bleed hole, which you want to try to keep clean later with isopropyl, just to clean it out. But and I can hold lots of IPA in there with paint and just do scenery. I don't have to worry about running out. But the problem is on social media is it's in the way, right? Like when the camera's in behind them showing it, you can't really see what's going on unless you go like this. But this one you can see the difference, right? Okay. But they're both adequate. And with a good compressor, they're good enough. And that's all you do. You just need an airbrush that doesn't cost you too much money, and they're good enough to do the job, okay? Okay, so I just want to show you how I touch this up quick. And this is why an airbrush is your best friend, especially in this hobby. Any hobby, miniature hobby really, but especially for model railroading. You know, you don't need to be Michelangelo to use one. They're just very basic. And I've said this before, that's on off for air. Like you can't control the air pressure unless you regulate it from the compressor. So what you set at the compressor will always be the pressure that comes here. Okay, so when you push down, you got your air, so just push all the way down. The dual action is when you pull this back. This controls the paint that comes down from this cup down into the orifice and then gets atomized by the air. And the solvent, in this case IPA, isopropyl alcohol at 99% in this case. So I can come in here and I can just spray air and then slowly pull back my finger. Watch, like just think in your mind. And if you have problems with it, you know, slipping, going back too far, you can tighten up this valve here. Or sorry, this needle that, like I don't want to pull it back right now because it'll, oh yeah, there, see? See that? See how it moves? That lets the paint out, right? Now, if you turn this little knob, it's the same on every airbrush. There's a spring in there, and it'll make this really hard to pull back. So that'll help you just bring in a tiny amount of paint onto the model and be in total control of it. That's the whole point of a dual action airbrush. A single action airbrush, you just set this manually like the needle, and that's it. You can't control it in and out. The advantage of the dual action is you can control it in and out, and if it gets a little dry or cloggy, you can just pull it all the way back and just blast it through, and the IPA will blow the tip clean and lube it up, and it's ready to go again, okay? So you can see there what I just did. Now notice how it's very light colored. That's okay. Ties on short lines get replaced all the time. Now I can come in here with a bit of water-based acrylic or Vallejo and just put a little wash on that, or oil even, and change up that tie, because having all the randomness, like I'm probably going to go over this part again because this is the end, well not the end of the line, but this is as far as I've built on the 2 sections so far. So as I go, sometimes I'll move forward, lay track, and then I'll come back and revisit an area. But this has all been re and read now, and I was going to go darker like these ties, but I think I'm going to just pick out one or two with a brush and make them darker and leave a couple maybe random faded like that. But you can see that that's all it took, right? It was a very tiny, the most minuscule amount of paint to do that. And there's no paint buildup, so I can basically, you know, move these points back and forth, and like there's no paint glooping up and making my throw bar stick to the bottom of my rails and etc. Okay.